If Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner is feeling the pressure, he sure isn't showing it. Geithner spoke at his alma mater, Dartmouth College, on Friday and offered an optimistic outlook for the U.S. economy. We had a spy there. Our contributing editor, Danny Blanchflower, is an economics professor at Dartmouth. Danny was at the event. He actually met with Geithner ahead of the speech, and he's with us now from Hanover, New Hampshire. Danny, good morning to you. Let me ask you first, what did you and the Treasury Secretary talk about?
Oh, I'm not going to talk about what we talk about. I'm going to talk about what he said during the meeting. I mean, he actually was pretty optimistic, actually. He said, it's hard for people these days to be optimistic, but given where we were, I am quite optimistic. And he talked about the fact that there have been temporary hits against the U.S. economy, and Washington had to come through. But he actually used a phrase which I like, which is that realistic, pragmatic compromises are being made, and there'll be lots of people will walk out, and this is just a show. But I was sort of taken that he was really saying, you know, the debt ceiling is going to be raised. Don't worry, there are problems ahead, but we're making progress.
Well, Danny, he's been saying that, and so has the president, and so have other people, but there is no deal. In fact, the Republicans walked away from the table last week. Now the president is back, or is taking part, finally, in these deficit negotiations. So is that just posturing on the part of the Treasury Secretary, or does he actually know something that we don't yet know?
Well, I think he does know. I mean, maybe he does. He said he'd been in on the negotiations, so it's hard to say what he knows. But I was struck by, he was quite optimistic, but I think he's made it clear, and I kind of agree with him, that, you know, we better sort this debt ceiling out. It would be really a very bad deal if we didn't. And I think people understand that. I mean, I sense that he was just saying a lot of the talk is just posturing. As a commentator on Bloomberg, my view is that that better be true. Let's hope so, because this, you know, if that's not the case, we're going to be very busy in the fall.
Danny, the Treasury Secretary frames his comments about optimism as a comparison to the depths of the credit crisis and the catastrophe, the abyss, etc. Is it really fair to compare the mood today with the mood after Lehman Brothers went bankrupt? Because if the Greek debt crisis or the U.S. debt crisis is going to be the next Lehman moment, shouldn't we be comparing the mood today to the mood before Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, to the summer of 2008, when nobody saw the crisis coming? Right.
Well, that's a worry that I've had for the last few months. It has a terrible feeling at the moment. It's very similar. I mean, I sat at the Bank of England, and there were talks there very similar to those now. People were just not really thinking anything very bad was coming. I mean, Geithner talked about it, and you used the phrase, he said, we looked into the abyss. There was catastrophic collapse that we had. So that was really very bad. But I think it's absolutely clear that there are major risks coming from Europe. And because of the stimulus, fiscal and monetary, he talked about preventing us going over the cliff. The worry is that when you start to pull back, the ECB's once again thinking of raising rates. If you start to pull back, the worry is that you head back over the cliff. And if you're interested in economic history and you look back to the 30s, that's exactly what's happened. So the fear has to be, don't get complacent, think it's all over. And he certainly made the pitch that those who say the interventions of fiscal and monetary policy didn't work are completely wrong. And actually, I agree with him.
Danny, the Treasury Secretary, if he agrees that we should not get complacent, then why do what he's done in the past? I don't think he did it on Friday. Talk about how market interest rates on U.S. Treasuries are an indicator of just how much tolerance debt investors have for the deficit. We know that the 10-year yield is below 3%, but isn't it a little bit dangerous to be taking confidence in yields given how quickly bond markets can move?
Well, that's obviously a concern. I mean, we can only really talk about what he said on Friday, and I was sort of encouraged by it. But clearly, the worry is that the markets through most of 2008 didn't have it right. I was just looking at bond yield expectations in August 2008, say in the UK, and the market expected for the next 5 years the rates to be above 5%. So the markets have made mistakes in the past, and it certainly, in some sense, would be dangerous to just say, we have to do this because the markets think X. But I was quite encouraged. He sort of said that there have been temporary headwinds. Going forward, let's hope we don't make the mistakes of 2008. But I take the view that there are still significant risks, and this European sovereign debt crisis has still many machinations to go, and it looks very worrying this week.
Danny, I want to play a quick soundbite of the Treasury Secretary talking about his outlook for the economy. Listen in.
We've had roughly average growth rates since growth began about 2 years ago in the 2.5% to 3% range. We started the year with people expecting the first half would be between 3% and 4%. It's going to be more like 2%.
So, Danny, if the Treasury Secretary is right and growth rates in the second half are about 2%, how on earth is the unemployment rate going to come down?
Well, it is a real problem. He sounds awfully like a central banker. If you look at the FOMC this week, their forecast was much as he said. Growth forecasts have been lowered, and they've been lowered around the world. The MPC lowered growth forecasts, and people started to talk more about QE. And I think the answer is that this week, the likelihood of QE, which I've always thought was going to come probably in November in the US, perhaps even earlier in the UK. So we're going to see, I think, more stimulus coming. And the way you're going to get stimulus is through monetary policy. You won't be able to cut rates. I think central bankers around the world are feeling the pressure from governments who think Plan B is the monetary authorities are going to have to step in because they need to get unemployment down. And it doesn't look like things are going to come from the fiscal front. So monetary authorities, the Fed and the Bank of England, they are Plan B.
Danny, thanks so much as always. Danny Blanchflower, contributing editor here at Bloomberg, professor of economics at Dartmouth, where he was and still is, obviously, listening to Tim Geithner's speech there on Friday.